I played 600 hours of Ark before they even added the Giga. However, since then, I have not touched it, but now I'm going to throw myself into Fjordur and face off against this insanely hostile world. Not only do I have many questions I need answered, but you are about to witness someone having no clue what they're doing whilst working their way up to take on the 3 world bosses inside of Fjordur. This video took me well over 100 hours to create, so if you enjoy this, please let me know and subscribe if you'd like me to try this on other maps. But without further ado, let's begin our 100 days. This journey began waking up on the northern shores of Vardiland, as I got to work crafting defences in the shape of spears and building up my first base, just in time to protect myself from the elements of the night. Spoiler alert, I spent way too long in this tiny little base, as you will see. As dawn broke on day 2, I headed out to gather materials, and quicker than I was expecting, I was already donning my metal tools, whilst also trying to tame a trike. This took way more arrows than I was expecting, and once they were finally down, I saw why. Level 130 as my first dino. I was excited as this was for sure going to keep me safe from predators for a while, and as he was taming up and night began to fall, I also knocked out a level 60 pterosaur, and just before midnight, Terry the Trike was my first tame to join the party. Soon after, in the early morning of day 3, Terrence was ready to go. However, there was one issue. If I actually wanted to ride him, I would need a saddle, which for flying mounts, as far as I know, chitin and keratin is always needed, so I went hunting for turtles. After a short massacre, I was able to craft the saddle, and I was now already flying. I flew around to see the vast landscape around me, but I was on the hunt for any carnivore to help me gather more meat and hide. Whilst doing so, I spotted a strange red beam, which turned out to be runes that leveled both me and my mount greatly. I also checked the island in the middle of the sea, and after seeing a titanoboa, I noped out of there and continued with my mission, and soon enough, I spotted a raptor. Not having a spyglass meant I was left hoping their levels were high enough to be good, but after knocking it out easily, I saw it was a level 150 and I became the most protective tamer in the world. Yes, just for a raptor, I know. I kept all of the hyenas at bay, and soon enough, Frank was tamed up and it was time to head on back. Things were going far too well, and I knew something was soon going to go wrong, but it would appear that my time was not yet, as another raptor was near my base, and after knocking them out, I saw that they were level 145. As day 3 finally ended and morning broke on the 4th, Grant was now tamed up along with another pterosaur called Paul. Now I had my meat grinders, I went out hunting and farming meat and hide all day, along with some more berry farming to start making many narcotic. I carried this on through to day 5, where I headed out again on Terrence, and soon enough, I saw an Argentavis, and I knew that I wanted it. I got to work firing my arrows and hoping to knock it out, and soon enough, I did just that, but Apache was attempting to kill my bird, so I took care of them. I spent more time making sure we had enough meat for the RG and their torpor was high enough, and as it got dark, I decided to wait it out, trying not to freeze. In the morning of the 6th day, Aggie was tamed and now began the hunt for even more keratin, meaning a lot more turtle killing. This lasted the whole day, and on day 7, I finally gathered enough to craft my RG a saddle and take to the skies on the back of my flying pack mule. I also decided that we needed a farm to look like I actually knew what I was doing, and created a simple plot with all the vegetables, but forgot that they needed some kind of fertilizer to actually start growing. On the 8th day, I finished off the irrigation with possibly the shoddiest pipework known to man and dino. A Phiomia also ran by my base, so I decided to tame it and use its poop to make me some fertilizer. Whilst waiting for the thatch and poop to do its thing, I went out opening some of those drops, only to get even more lucky and find a spyglass, so I could finally start picking and choosing which dinos I wanted. I went back to my base and crafted a rifle with some trank darts ready to hunt for another Argentavis to mate with Aggie, so that I could create my base moving transport. It didn't take me long to find a level 135, and I wanted it, knowing the last one was so easy. I went in and began shooting, and whilst trying to stop Aggie from attacking, I was killed, and then as day 9 began, I panicked. I flew back on Terrence and decided it would be a good idea to try again, only to meet the same fate. Once I finally arrived back on foot though, it appeared that Aggie had made it. However, Terrence wasn't so lucky and turned out to be my first casualty of the 100 days. But my luck was about to get worse. Much worse. But in the meantime, I scooped up a nearby Ankylosaurus to carry him home and drop him into a trap that I had made. We had made it to 10 days now, as I dropped him in before knocking him out and taming my level 85 Kylo. I took him out for a little test with Aggie to collect some metal, and this carried on for the next 2 days. Days 11 and 12 were just spent collecting more metal and stone, plus hide and anything else for a little plan I was devising, whilst also crafting more bullets. But before day 12 was over, I was feeling far too confident. But my world was about to come crashing down, and I really need your help here. I placed down something that I was prepping for, my RG trap. However, I spotted a Rex nearby and wanted to give it a go. I was able to take it on and kill it, and my confidence was at an all-time high. But whilst looking for more male Argentavis, I spotted some Sabertooths. For no good reason, I just thought that adding one of these to my pack would be cool. I didn't need one. However, I went in anyway, ready to pick it up and carry it back to base. But they had other ideas. As I got to the ground, I was thrown off Aggie, and the Sabres made short work of both me and my mount. And not wanting to farm all of that keratin again, I began to panic. It was now the morning of day 13, and I got onto the back of Frank, hoping to get straight in and straight out with both my stuff and Aggie's. But once again, I arrived there and was thrown off my mount and stunned. As we died, yes, I also lost Frank. I could not find anything on Sabertooth having the ability to dismount you. So if you are aware of what happened and how I can prevent this in the future, please let me know in the comments. That would be great, thank you. But now with 2 dinos down, I decided to just run in by myself. And luckily, I was able to retrieve everything. However, if you believe that was the end of my woes, you would be greatly mistaken, as they have only just begun. Somewhere along the way, I had lost my spyglass. However, as I arrived back on the beach right near my base, I spotted a Rex. With my trank arrows and darts combined, I had plenty to knock out this Rex. And whilst teasing him on top of the ledge, I fired away. I fired a lot. Until finally, I was actually out of ammo, and he was still not even running. So I jumped on the back of Grant and rode home to try and craft some more. As I was finishing up making another batch of trank arrows, as day 14 started, so did the sound of stomping feet, and before I knew it, the Rex had made its way over to my base while deciding to not only aggro all of my dinos, but also a nearby Bronto. I was able to take out the Bronto while firing more and more arrows at the Rex, and soon he began to run, but not before killing all of my dinos other than Terry and Kylo. Knowing that losing this Rex would set me back to square one, I gave chase and continued to fire until finally, he was down. And level 150! I put everything into this tame, waiting by it morning and night. Literally doing nothing on both day 15 and 16, making sure nothing attacked it. On day 17, however, I went back to base to make sure I had enough narcotics, and for some reason, both an Argentavis level 130 and a Dilophosaurus decided to team up on me, literally camping my bed. Eventually though, I was able to kill the Dilo, and was now giving chase to the RG. As it dropped from the skies however, I saw 2 raptors nearby and knew I needed to stop them as I needed the ability to fly again. With the help of some bowlers, I was now also taming a level 55 and level 90 pair of raptors as I now awaited all of my tames. Throughout day 18, we now had Ruby and Flare helping me gather meat for the other tames as we sat and waited for some more. On the 19th day, I stayed near the tames and began making up plenty of spark powder and gunpowder whilst making sure their torpor bars stayed full. But on the dawn of the 20th day, Jet the Rex was mine, and whilst I gathered all of the materials to craft a saddle, I was now able to ride this beast. So I began to hunt down more keratin, so we could once again fly as our Argentavis was now tamed. Finally on day 21, after running around for so long on Jet, I had enough keratin that meant we could fly again. So out I headed in the search of some obsidian and crystal, so that I could get another spyglass and maybe trim my hair, which after a long search and many terrible drops, I had finally found it and began to head back. After making it back on the 22nd day, I was now able to see levels and genders of dinos and start breeding them again, whilst also collecting some human hair, which I'm sure there's a use for that somewhere. Anyway, I headed back out in the search of a male Argy, hoping to find a high level one, but I did not expect it to prove this difficult. I saw many, but all of those are female. However, as one male flew over and towards my trap, there was a little mishap, and before long, the male one was killed by my own Argy. As it did though, and I managed to get back on, a saber-tooth came from nowhere, so I decided I was going to take this one home and tame it up. Day 23 was much of the same. After taming Sable, most of the time was spent looking for a male Argy, and at this point, I would have taken a level 20, but as I spotted one and got it back into the trap, it all started to happen again as both Argies were fighting. However, I was able to stop them, and before long, trap the bird, meaning I was now surely able to tame this male. Only, there was a slight issue. After taking so much damage, my trank arrows killed it before knocking it out, but as it was now late and too dark, I was coming home again empty-handed. Just when I thought it couldn't get much worse, on day 24, I saw absolutely no males whilst crafting up plenty of narcotics and more trank arrows. I found myself looking for what seemed like a needle in a haystack, and as I went home, I was thinking 1 or 2 more days of this, and it may just be quicker to move my base with just one Argy. But on the 25th day, and a quarter of the way through this, after a short search, I had finally found a male. Only level 50, but it would do for what I needed. Almost like I had it down to a T now, I trapped them simply and soon enough, they were knocked out. So I went around to gather some prime meat from a nearby steg, which is when I spotted a nice little location for our base. Whilst awaiting the tame, I took out the Rex to gather more meat, before finally, I had a new Argy, Angmar, whilst also naming my previous one, Agnes. Day 26 started with me finally breeding my first dinos. Soon enough getting an egg, and whilst that was hatching next to the fires, I headed out and ended up taming another bird, Artemis. Reggie was born on the 27th day, so I continued to imprint on him until he was fully grown. And as he was and I now had my 4 Argies, it was time to gather the resources and build up structures for our new base. By the morning of the 28th day, Agnes was filled up with the foundations of the new base, and we were ready to go, so I started off by placing them down in the general area that I would like my base, whilst gathering more materials to keep building it up. The 29th day, all foundations were down and the first layer of walls were up, so I placed down the storage boxes and began to fill the Argies with everything from my first base. Finally, on the 30th day, Everything was loaded up and I took the flock over, sorting out and loading everything into the correct places. Everything was placed, and on the 31st day, more walls were crafted and placed, whilst also spotting a high level Patchy, which for no other reason than I like that dinosaur, I tamed him, naming them Dome, before doing something that I should have done so long ago. I managed to trap a Therizinosaurus and knock them out, getting some prime meat, only to realise that they do not eat meat, as these are apparently herbivores. It was only level 90, but the amount of narcotics I spent on this was insane. I could barely leave it for too long whilst I went back and forth doing little things at the new base whilst keeping the bird down. I spent much longer than anticipated on this, as days 32 and 33, using well over 200 narcotics at least and barely being able to do anything without it almost waking up, I carried on waiting, but little did I know how worth it this was going to be. On the night of the 34th day, Trisha was finally tamed, so I brought her back to the new base. Taking out what is known in the communities as Tickle Chicken on day 35, I had found my fibre, thatch and wood gatherer, as she was collecting so much, so I spent the day doing just this, making sure I wasn't going to run out anytime soon. As nighttime fell, I began looking through all of my engrams to just see the things that I could make, and decided that I needed to create a hatchery with aircon so we could begin creating an army for the bosses in this world. But that was a way off yet, and we had more pressing matters. Day 36 started with the Great Migration, rounding up all the rest of my dinos at the old base and bringing them on over to my new one, and before long, after getting them unstuck a couple of times, everyone had arrived safely, so the rest of the day I spent crafting up little bits for the days to come. Day 37 began with my RGs laying a couple of eggs, and before long out popped RJ and Arthur, and after some imprinting and both fully growing up, I had found my new favourite flyer, as Arthur had some pretty insane stats. Now that these had grown up, I could turn my attention to something that was needed on day 38. I began building as many spikes as I could, as well as a behemoth gate and some smaller ones to protect our base. It became apparent that I needed them quickly as an alpha raptor came by, however I soon made quick work of them on the back of Jet. So now I was feeling much more confident. Between days 39 and 40, I built more structures and finished my defences, and after a long rest and wondering what to do next, I noticed it was getting a little too dark. Day 41, I spent crafting many torches to place around and made sure each was filled to run for as long as I needed them to, and as night fell, my base lit up and looked great from above. Also, I could finally see when I was walking around without having to repair my hand torch over and over. After feeling like I had slowed down, on day 42 I decided to get to work, crafting up a fabricator, making some flak armour, and saw something called a cryopod, which seemed interesting. I thought this may help me in finding a mate for Jet, however during the move I saw that I had some runestones, and they were telling me to look inside the obelisk terminals. I headed over to one and couldn't find out what I was supposed to be doing with them. However, I did find out how to craft cryopods and where. Also, I headed out on Arthur to look around at what dinos were nearby and spotted another alpha raptor, which he made light work of. On day 43, I decided to head out in search of some tech dinos for some oil and electronics to start crafting up some things, and after a while, I stumbled upon a cave. I was not okay with this, however, and decided to leave it for now, as I headed back home and I spotted a Phiomia and needed some more poop. I decided to pick them up and bring them back to base for me to tame them up. We started the 44th day off collecting poop and storing it ready to make some fertilizer, however now began a long journey on the hunt for both silica pearls and a female Rex to mate. I flew over the waters to new lands and eventually found some pearls. However, all of the Rexes appeared to be male. But as I was looking around, I spotted an egg in the ground, which turned out to be a fertilized Deinonychus egg, so I grabbed it and flew away. Throughout the rest of day 45, I found nothing but created some gates to trap any wrecks I may have found, and as it was getting late, I had finally found one. I set my trap and I chased down the wrecks, getting it to follow, but once it was now pitch black and I could not find where I had previously placed the gates. In the early hours of day 46, I finally spotted it, and after a little trouble, she was finally trapped, and I began firing my arrows until they fell asleep, and now I had to defend against an Allosaurus. All was pretty uneventful until on day 47, finally Scarlet was tamed up and I was ready to take her home, only there was a large ocean between us and my base. Realizing I had all but the polymer on me, I had to leave her there as I flew back to craft a cryopod and make sure she got back safely. So once I had collected everything and made my way up to the obelisk, I had finally crafted my first cryopod and it was time to test it out. I flew all the way back over to her and enclosed her in this tiny little mechanism before making my way back over and finally introducing Jet to his first lover. Day 48 started with a beautiful breeding of Jet and Scarlet, and before long, I now had a Rex egg, but nowhere to hatch it, so I quickly got to work on the hatchery, crafting air conditioning, lights, a generator, and more oil whilst building a foundation for this new building. It was on day 49 that everything was finally wired up. I started hatching my new eggs, not the Deinonychus one as it was still too hot apparently, and before long, Granola was born, which after a day of imprinting, began growing into a beast. As night fell, we switched on the lights. My base was now looking great, properly lit up with no need to literally burn through all of my wood. On the 50th day, I was now halfway through this challenge, and with some more imprinting, I now had bred my first dino for the army to take on these bosses. As Granola was fully grown, it was time to breed her also with Jet, as I wanted to get as many of these as I could quickly so we could get to work taking them on. Day 51 had us hatching more eggs. Both Ramen and Prince were born, and we carried on for the rest of the day imprinting and gathering meat to keep up with all of the carnivores we now had. In between imprinting, on the 52nd day, I made more aircon in the hopes of hatching my Deinonychus egg, and whatever I tried, nothing worked, so I gave up on it and I put that away, forgetting about it for good. As my babies grew up, I started a breeding line of Rexes, ready to lay as many eggs as they could whilst leveling some up, eating the remains of some hatched unwanted RGs, and making more gasoline for the generator. We started off day 53 with an early morning metal run, trying to get drops as they disappeared in front of me. Needing a break from breeding dinos, I headed out with the intention of taming a Fjordhawk, but I was not ready for the complete mess I had gotten myself into. Not only did it take me too long to realise that, in order to tame these birds you had to dismount whilst they ate the bodies of the dinos, and as they did eat, they were taming so slowly, and at the end of the day, I had not much to show as I tried to feed them more and more. By the morning of day 54, I managed to have just one bird taming so that it could go a little faster, and after feeding them a Spino, they were still not even half tamed. But to make matters even worse, the Fjordhawk got stuck and everything I tried to unstick them didn't work, and I was left to find another and start the process all over again. Knowing how to tame them now, however, we started moving faster and I was feeling good about this one. But as night fell, it decided to circle the ground, not going anywhere else, and like the previous one, getting stuck. So I decided against it and headed home empty-handed. But if you think that taming attempt was bad, You've seen nothing yet. I arrived home on the 55th day and got to work hatching more of my Rex army, as Barbara, Pranilla, Tyrion, Jeff and Yoni were all born, which only means one thing: more imprinting. As day 56 dawned, Ruby was born, and whilst imprinting more for the rest of the day, I killed some time also creating more lights for the Rex breeding area, which took up the second half of my base. Day 57 was spent moving all of the newly grown Rexes while sorting through all of my storage and collecting more eggs ready for more hatching. Much the same as the other days, day 58 started with the birth of Oscar, Tristan, Jinx, Jade, Kai and Onyx, with more imprinting until Bonky was later hatched, and we carried on looking after the young. Day 59 had me collecting more meat for all my hungry dinos, filling the troughs, leveling the Rexes, storing more fertilized eggs and bunching them together more once the imprinting was complete. As I mentioned about bad taming, day 60 began with high expectations, creating blood bags in order for me to tame a Desmodus, whilst getting plenty of materials ready to craft more cryopods. Off I flew in the hope of finding a nice bat to tame, however things didn't go as planned. After not much luck, on the 61st day I headed over to the nearby obelisk, as I remember seeing one there at some point. However, as I flew around, I had no such luck. Despite this, something else did catch my eye, but looking back, I really wish it didn't. Seeing a Megatherium, I decided to knock him out and tame them, but whilst waiting, there it was. A Uteranus was stomping around, and I knew this would be a perfect tame, so I got prepared to knock this out. I knocked out a level 150 Rex on the beach with no flyers. This should be a piece of cake, right? I started firing tranq arrows, but this guy just didn't want to stay still, until eventually he ran off, leaving me to chase until inevitably dying from the cold. After realizing I had not made a bed at my new base, on day 62 I finally made it back, getting to my pterosaur and flying at speed back to my body, forgetting about the low stamina. I finally got my things back and soon enough got back to tranking the Ute. However, as they began to run, I decided the best thing to do was to get off in front of it. Only, it ran no more and decided to eat me up. Even better, I still forgot to build a bed, so I had to spawn on my base on the beach again before running back and riding on Ramen up to where my body was. I had one issue though, that I could not find my flyers anywhere, but whilst looking for them, I could see that my Megatherium had tamed, so I tried to take them home at least. On the way though, I began freezing, so I just had to run back, leaving behind my new friend for now. Losing not only the Mega, but the birds too. Finally on day 63, I did the sensible thing of crafting some fur clothing so I could venture through the snow in the hopes of discovering my lost friends. So I crafted a new RG saddle and took off on the hunt. Eventually, I was able to find the birds stuck up on a rock, so I brought them home and headed out in the hopes of finding my Megatherium. Sadly, I had no such luck, so eventually I continued with my hunt for a Desmodus, in the hopes of taming one. And you know how I said the taming was going to be bad? Well, the bad taming is not over yet, not by a long shot. I headed out to the swamp island near my first base, and as it turns out, night on there really sucks. So I spent the night trying to stay alive whilst not being able to see anything. As the sun rose on day 64, I had finally found not one Desmodus, but two. However, after jumping off and having slow reaction, my RG killed both. Just as I thought that all hope was lost, however, another attacked, and after picking me up and using all of my blood bags super quick, it then began draining me of all of mine before quickly killing me. leaving me to fly back and kill it, giving up on yet another tame. But as I'm sure you think the bad tames are done, oh no, we still have more to come as I arrive home, repairing all of my gear and crafting up plenty more trank arrows for another venture out. For some reason, on day 65, after so much wasted time and failed attempts, I was now feeling confident that I knew what I was doing and flew myself back into the snowy mountains on the hunt for a Uteranus from before. But before long, I was tranking it again, and for real this time, it was actually running from me and close to being knocked out, only I could not get it out of the water as he kept swimming in circles, until finally falling asleep and drowning in the water. On my way back, however, I found another and I started to tame it, but I was soon killed. And again. I flew back on my pterosaur on day 66, which soon also met its end, but as I finally got the UT running, I ran out of arrows, and it was too fast to knock out punching him, so I flew quickly back home to craft more trank darts. Day 67 was the long-awaited end of this series of unfortunate events, and I went back to tame the UT, and after firing everything that I had into it, it did not fall asleep, and it carried on running around, so I gave up knowing this was clearly too much for me right now. Feeling a little defeated, however, I spent the rest of the day hunting for my lost Megatherium, and by nightfall, he was still lost, and I decided to give up on them and start moving forward. In the early hours of day 68, I arrived home, refilling my supplies of narcotics and trank arrows, leveled up my Rexes, collected more meat, prevented an Argy from attacking my base, before heading out on the hunt for more metal. Day 69 was an interesting one, not just because of the funny number. But I finished collecting my metal and crystal before arriving back at my base and seeing the most strange sight. After losing the Megatherium on day 63, somehow, by some miracle, he had made it all the way back after all this time alone. Once I introduced him to his new home, I took off in search of a new creature to tame, and this one was called an Andrewsarchus. Before I say what happened, please remember the title of the video, specifically the noob part, as all of this is very new to me, and I tried not to do too much research as to spoil things, but for reasons that you will see, this failed me, so as my knowledge gets better later on, this is the point I decided that I should research more what I was doing. But as I found one of these, I began tranking him to knock him out. For a while. Chasing him down, and nothing happened. Until eventually, he killed me. I headed back to carry on, but it was now too dark to chase, and as I was waiting to spot them or for it to turn day, that is when I finally realised these were a passive tame and needed honey. So on day 70, I flew out looking in spots I remember seeing hives in order to tame this guy, and upon finding some and returning to my tame, I began throwing down the honey, struggling to get him to eat it instead of chasing me. Before long, however, he finally started to take the bait, and after a while of riding around on this short minigame, I had tamed Mr. Andy Circus, who I just realised should have been named My Precious. Even more so when I got home and crafted a saddle, which ended up giving this guy a huge turret on his back. That was something that I was not expecting, but it was a nice surprise. However, after this I did a lot more sorting and gathering of materials for the rest of the day. The time was getting near to my first boss fight as day 71 dawned, and so I crafted many more cryopods before I cryoed up all of my battle ready Rexes and headed out on the hunt for some alphas in order to gather more runestone, as I only had 18. As the hunt began, the first day was a no-show, leading me on a wild goose chase all around the island. Day 72 was much the same, having no luck with alphas, so I flew to the island of fire, but very quickly began burning up, and after seeing some cool dinos but nearly dying from the heat, I headed back to the mainland to carry on my search. The 73rd day started much better, however, with me finding 2 alpha raptors, both giving me 5 stones each after being killed, leaving me with 28 and no more to find on that day. Day 74 also had no more alphas. However, I did find the caves in which our first boss fight would take place, so I cleared it out before looking for any more runestones. Finally, on day 75, I spotted another alpha raptor, and after killing it, gave me just 2 runestones. But that meant that I now had 30, so I was ready to take on the fight against Baylor. Or was I? I threw out all of my Rexes, and it appeared that cryo sickness is a thing, which left all of my dinos resting for a long while. So whilst waiting, I decided to make a mini base, in case I was to die so I could spawn back at my bed. It also appears that cryo sickness lasts a long time, so throughout day 76, I made my makeshift base a little bigger, but as night fell, the Rexes began waking up, as I began leveling them up and preparing them. As the 77th day dawned, my muster of Rexes were ready, and as I placed in the runestones, she was soon summoned, and this fight had begun. More so than I had expected, my dinos were making short work of her, and soon enough, after taking 0 casualties, Baylor was defeated, and I was feeling unstoppable, especially whilst I got an Ascendant Rex saddle from this too. I got all of the Rexes back into their cryopods before heading home. After an eventful previous day, day 78 had me trying to show off my new Baylor trophy, but with no luck sadly, and as I hung up my flak armor for now, I decided to head out on another alpha hunt, but this would prove to be much worse than before. I found nothing. Not just this day, but day 79, 80, and even 81 as I tried changing things up, searching on ground with MrMEOLA. Whilst losing hope that I would ever find an alpha, on the 82nd day, soon enough I discovered an alpha lead Sicthus, which was the easiest alpha kill ever, and it gave me 21 runestones, so all I needed was 1 more of these and I could face the next boss. However, the rest of the day proved to be more similar to previous, showing no more results. I realised on day 83 that we were nearing the end of my 100 days, and I had not once visited one of the other realms, so I tested transporting myself to Asgard to look for alphas. However, as I was not aware what would happen, I accidentally teleported half of my dinos at my base with me. Sadly, this meant I had to spend the rest of the day teleporting back and having to walk all of my dinos home before leaving again with just Arthur and MrMEOLA. Sadly, this is where I also learned that you cannot fly here, so Arthur was rendered useless as I got on the back of my Rex and stomped around in the hunt for more alphas. After looking around, it looked nice enough in Asgard. However, what looked much nicer was what I saw on the dawn of day 84, the giant Alpha Rex in front of me, the first Alpha Rex I have ever actually seen, which turned out to be level 140. We had a pretty fierce fight, but soon enough we came out on top with a whopping 52 runestones, leaving me with enough to fight both bosses, without needing to search for any more alphas at all. I took my trophy home and mounted the Rex's skull on the wall, as I decided now to start preparing for not only this boss, but the last one too, as Jotunheim is not a place to be taken lightly, as from what I've heard, the cold would certainly kill you in an instant. So off we headed once again in the search for an otter for some insulation, but as it was too dark for water diving, I came back and sorted through the meat, making sure my dinos had plenty to eat. Day 85 came and it was time to head out in the search of an otter, but everywhere I looked for one, I had no luck, only finding a leech, which I quickly learned needed burning off, and a thylacoleo as night fell, attacking me in the water, which luckily I was able to deal with. So for the rest of the night, we waited above the lake, avoiding any danger until the morning. The otter hunt continued on the 86th day, and after a while of searching more lakes and taking on piranhas, I finally found them. I won't lie though, to tame these guys you need to kill a fish, drag it over to the otter and click feed, which sounds easy enough, but whilst the fish flies around and wiggles in your face, trying to click feed instead of dropping the fish proved to be much more difficult than I had expected. So much so that night soon fell and I had to await the morning light again, hovering over the lake once more. As day broke on the 87th day, however though, I finally tamed Ottie, so I placed her around my neck and flew back home, starting work on my new greenhouse. I worked into the night, crafting the foundations, plots and some greenhouse walls and door frames, but there was a slight issue. I needed much more crystal. On the 88th day, I headed out to find some in order to increase my crop yields, whilst also collecting more poop for fertilizer and created the most botched greenhouse ever. But I will say that this is the most fine piece of pipe work I have ever done, and I was actually quite proud of it. Oh, and I collected more poop. But day 89, everything was now fertilized and planted, ready to help with the recipes. But as I left my crops to grow, I put back on my flak, ready to take on the next boss as we headed out to Asgard to face Hattie and Skull. After searching for a while, I finally found the battle zone and began uncryoing my Rexes, this time waiting so they didn't get cryo sickness. However, I feel this took as long as waiting for them all to recover from cryo sickness, as this lasted the rest of the day, and through day 90. Until finally, in the afternoon of day 91, all Rexes were up and leveled, ready to take on the 2 wolf bosses. I placed in the runestones and sprinted back to Pranilla, realizing I had placed them much further away than I had first thought, but luckily made it back in time to send in the herd and take down both Hattie and Skull. Once again, and actually to my surprise this time, neither Hattie nor Skull were much of a match for any of my Rexes. However, quite sadly, as Jet killed one of them, he himself was finished off. But soon after, both were dead and these bosses were defeated. I was overjoyed, but part of me was sad that out of all of my Rexes, the one that we lost was the father of all of the others. The original level 150 stomped through my base and killed all but my Trike and Anki, but with 9 days left to prepare for the final boss fight, I had no time to sit and weep, and whilst finding the relics of both Hattie and Skull, they had also dropped me an Ascendant assault rifle. I tried to take all of the Rexes home without using cryo to prevent the long wait, as I did not have the time to do this again, but it turned out that this was a nightmare and we got stuck on every little rock and each other, and often I had to get them all to just follow me and run on foot. We finally got back on day 92, where I sorted through what I had, taking off the flak for the last time as we wrapped ourselves in the fur, ready to brave the cold. Just for good measure, I decided it would also be a good idea to hatch more Rexes and really make sure that we could take on this next and final foe. On day 93, we hatched more, as Ronald, Johnny, Ryan, Ray, Ron and Ross were all born, and whilst imprinting, I learned from a recipe that I had found how to make medical brew, so brewed up as much of that as I could. The imprinting was finished off on day 94, and I began making advanced bullets for my assault rifle, just in case, as we made many more medical brews and continued to wait for the crops to grow. Day 95 was very much the same, crafting more medical brews, more bullets, and still waiting for the crops to grow. I went out on day 96 to gather more meat for my Rexes as they healed up more, but after this and accidentally creating some red paint, I decided to have some fun, testing my paint on my RG. With 3 days left now, on day 97, I carried on painting on my clothes, the doorway, and even the Rex trophy, whilst heading out to craft some more cryopods for the final fight as I began to cryo them all. After patiently waiting, my crops were finally grown and producing what I needed, so I got to work cooking up some fryer curry to keep me warm inside of Jotunheim. Whether all I had done was going to work, I did not know, but only time would tell, and as I was now ready, I gathered everything, including Otti, before the dawn. This was it, day 99, and I was ready. I had everything I needed as I prepared to enter the final battlegrounds. I will admit, to prevent another boring wait, I discovered that turning on PvE settings on your single player world removes any time needed to wait to uncryo your dinos. So I did this as I would not have made the 100 days otherwise. Also, I did not want to wait that long again, but it was time, and I entered. It was incredibly cold, but after searching for a while, I had found the entrance, and thanks to all of my prep, I was able to withstand the cold much better than I was expecting. As the 100th and final day dawned, all Rexes were now uncryoed, and it was time to face off against the giant elemental bear, Steinbjorn. I summoned him up and jumped on the back of Pernilla for one final fight, and boy was this a fight. Unlike the others, my Rexes weren't doing nearly as much damage, and even worse, much sooner than I had expected, they were dying, one by one, and sometimes multiple at a time. They were falling fast, and I was unsure whether I could even do this, as soon enough, it was just me and Pernilla left against the might of Steinbjorn. Knowing we were fighting a losing battle, as he had not even lost a quarter of his health, I jumped off waiting near the exit to abandon all, firing my rounds into the bear, which did nothing but tickle him until something happened. His floating icicles stopped in the air, pointed at me, and in an instant, I was impaled. With this, the challenge was lost. I had no way to beat him now, and all of my Rexes I had worked so hard to breed were now lost. But honestly, with the base I created, the dinosaurs that I had tamed, and the amount that I learned, I found that this was one of the most fun adventures I'd had in Ark, and whilst those were my first bosses ever faced, I was proud of how far I got. But if you enjoyed this, please like it and let me know, and if you want to see more challenges similar to this, then be sure to subscribe and keep up with all of the Ark content.